Happy days, happy people, and welcome to another anatomy lecture with Ulu Yoga. My name is Cody, and today we're going to be speaking about fascia and fascial play. So now some of you might know what fascia is, and I hope that you do, because we're going to be expanding on some basic knowledge of fascia that I hope you already have. If not, I will briefly just go through what fascia is, how it works in the body, or rather how we think it works in the body, and then we will begin to expand with some concepts and speak about some practices we can bring into our yoga classes as teachers and as students that can help give us greatest mobility within fascia and basically just learn how to use it to bring more fluidity, more mobility, and just honestly less stress in the body. But let's just first define fascia for a few seconds. So, brief history of fascia. It was a part of the body that we believed to just be in a singular location, a single sheet of fascia that we thought to be just in the abdominal region. But then we realized that fascia itself is something that interconnects through the entire body. And when I mean entire, it's entire. It's every single bone, muscular fiber, everything is intertwined with this net of fascia. Again, just the best analogy that I can think of is if you think of an orange, right? The fruit, that thing that you eat. And when you open it up and peel the skin, there's a white pith that is like this netting that surrounds the entire orange and is just between the skin and the orange, but is also intertwined between the orange itself and the fibers of the orange. This is essentially what fascia is. Exactly the same thing. We have our skin on the outside, and in between the skin and pretty much where the muscle starts and the inner starts is this fascial sheath. But then it also runs intertwined with it. So this is why fascia sometimes can be a little bit difficult to speak about in terms of its properties and where it starts, where it ends, and how to access it in the body. But we're going to do our best. The next thing you can just think of fascia is think of it as an organism, something that is alive, something that has its own form of intelligence. And this might be some form of conscious intelligence, who knows? But just think in terms of natural intelligence, right? So just like how a bird knows how to fly, when it's at the right time, it'll fly. Same thing with fascia. It knows when to be tight and when to be soft. It's something that we don't tell the fascia to do. It's a very subconscious thing that goes on. Right? This isn't something that is somatic. This is more autonomic if you were to think of a nervous system property. This is something that goes on without us really making a demand of it. And this property is quite interesting because it has the ability to be rigid. It has the ability to be plastic and the ability to be elastic, all at the same time. And what determines this, we're also not too sure, but we're going to hazard a guess, seems to be stress, or the release of stress, or when it's met with stress. And obviously there's a lot of other things that come into mind, but you can basically just think of it as stress. Whether it be stress on a very physical level, the stress of pressure, the stress of holding something up, the stress of contraction, or stress on a more mental level, energetic stress, the stress of life, the stress of overthinking, the stress of emotional baggage. These things too also put a stress on our fascial tissue. Now the tissue itself we're not going to go into much detail into because we're just going to go more from the properties and its functional use in a physical movement world. But it is good to know that there is seemingly a percentage of collagen and elasticin and different type of ground chemicals that make it up. Similar to connective tissue, what seems to be different about it is, again, its distribution. Ligaments and tendons always have somewhat similar kind of percentages and ratios of collagen over ground substance or collagen over elasticity, something like that. But for fascia, the distribution seems to be something we can't put our fingers on. because it just seems to know when it needs to produce more of something and when it needs to produce less. So this is what we're going to be speaking about today. And we're also going to go into some things where you can learn how to move with your fascia. But what is fascial play? And why is that the name of this topic? Is because the world of fascia is very new, even though it has been probably around 10 years now since we've started researching it and using it in the field of movements just as a concept. But still, we don't know too much about it, and we're still playing around a lot with the topic and how it works in the body. And this is why I've called this fascial play, because a lot of the things we're going to be discussing here are very much theoretical, but theoretical in the sense of experience. So we can feel how the body works, we can feel how certain things create tension in the body, and we can feel that there's a lot more to the body than just bones, ligaments, muscles, and tendons. There seems to be something more. There seems to be a greater intelligence of pull, of mechanism that lets the body function the way that it does. And we're learning more and more about this, and fascia might be a way to connect everything together. Again, in the past lectures, I've mentioned how sometimes medical science and things like this can seem a bit disconnected, where we take parts and we dissect them and move them from one to the other. And this can sometimes, I guess, make us feel like the relationship between those parts aren't there, that they're just something separate that act on their own. But this is very much not true. Everything acts together in unison. When we dissect something, it is merely just our concepts dissecting it. But a muscle is not a muscle unless it has a bone to pull towards it, or unless it has the nervous system attached to it to give it that little spark of electricity that makes it contract. If it's just there on a table, it's just a clump of flesh, and it doesn't actually act in any way that we would define a muscle as. And this is pretty much the case with everything that we do in the body, is that everything is interconnected. And so fascia is a great way to bring this all together. It is a webbing that, from an anatomical perspective now, we've said it interweaves everything. It creates chains between muscles, between bones, between the nervous system. It is also what provides the fluidity and liquidity in the body. It is what carries most of the water, what holds the water, what distributes the water. It is also what distributes the tensile stress of the body. When we're putting pressure or weight into a specific area of the body, the fascia seems to know how to bind itself and wrap itself. And then comes in the conscious idea that once we start gaining body awareness, and we start to use what we can, which is the electronic impulses to contract muscles, we can then use this also to move with fascia, to learn how to use our muscular somatic abilities, the controlling abilities, the voluntary abilities that we have in our body, to maybe relieve some fascia, because this is going to be probably the biggest thing that we need to do, is release it. And I'll speak about why in a second. But also learn how to flow with it. Learn how to use the body at its maximum capacity, which may be something that comes intuitively to some people or intuitively to us as an organism. But once we can bring a level of awareness to it, I feel like we can definitely evolve these movement patterns and the way that we move into something greater, into something that is more healthy for the body and more functional as a movement pattern just in general. So that's where we're going to start. And now we're going to jump into some concepts and speak about fascia and its properties, right? So like I said, fascia runs through everything. It intertwines. Fascia has 3 properties. And these are the properties that we're going to be talking about the most and learning about and helping us understand how we can work with our fascia. So number 1, we have elasticity. Number 2, rigidity. And number 3, fluidity. These are the basic ideas of how fascia works within the body. So elasticity, simple. Just think of an elastic band, right? Fascial elasticity means that because the human body is a whole organism, there are points at which these bands of fascia are held. We're going to be speaking about that in a second too. But basically, it starts at the ankles near the Achilles tendon, and it seemingly starts to wrap itself upward, crossing over through the hips, torso, into the shoulders, and then up through the neck into the crown of the head. And this wrapping creates an elastic type effect that works very amazingly in human movement. Right? It's the reason why a lot of the things that we do, especially when we start to get into more extreme movement, like aerial maneuvers, or even flows in vinyasa, it's what creates kinetic momentum, is because we as an organism become like an elastic band. Right? So just how, like with my hand, if I do this, you can see how there's some sort of spring in it, how it's easier to just allow my fingers to pop back. So when I go like that, they just automatically want to come down. It's gravity, but even if I do that, which is now taking away the gravity aspect of it, it's creating an elasticity. This is sometimes easier to do than this. This isn't an elastic movement. Maybe if I go to the full stretch, yes, and then slowly bringing it back. But you can think of this again the same as we use an elastic band, is you can pull it very slowly, go to its full width, and then slowly bring it back. Or you can pull it fast and let it pop back. Now I want you to think of how this might affect your body. So imagine inside of your body you have this fascial tissue, which, like everything else in your body, can deteriorate and can be destroyed. If I'm opening up my fascia slow, like this, like my hand is opening now, and then returning it slowly too, like this, then what would be the difference if I'm doing it fast, like this? The very obvious distance would be is that the one would be a little bit more destructive. So if I'm doing this really fast, just like if you took an elastic band and you started doing this with it, you're more than likely going to break it, right? One, it comes from the reason of mindfulness, is because you don't know how far you're actually stretching it. You don't know if you're stretching it too far, and also you're just allowing it to pull itself back. And this kinetic, very dynamic reaction can cause tears and it can cause damage within the elastic band. But if you just pull it as wide as you can, stop to the point where you feel like it might be causing a little bit of damage, and then slowly guide it back, there's a lot less damage involved, a lot less deterioration. And so this is how we want to think of the human body too. Yes, there will be times where we need to be dynamic, and we will use the elasticity of our body as an organism to create dynamic movements. Every time we run, or every time we do flips, or every time we do dynamic push-ups, or anything that's an explosive movement. Pulling yourself up when climbing, anything where there's a pop in your movements. This comes from the elasticity of the body. But you'll notice that when you do these dynamic movements, again, unless you are really controlled in your movement style, when you do these dynamic movements, it creates tension and pain and what we call repetitive movement injury again and again and again. But if you do it in moderation, and then to help with the recovery, you do these slow, more mindful movements, you can start to balance out and get less deterioration in the fascial tissue. And this is where yoga comes in, or practices like qigong or tai chi, or more mindful practices where your movements are about extension, getting full extension, or finding the extension that you need at that time of the day, and then bringing it back, and allowing for full contraction, coming all the way in, and just returning. And the difference here is mostly the comeback. In dynamic movements, it's very difficult to control the comeback. Right? You have to be of a certain level of awareness to know exactly, or your body needs to know exactly how to return itself back to its state without any damage being done. But the slower the movement, the easier it is to guide. And then this movement itself as well is soothing for the elasticity of the fascia rather than any sort of damaging. And you'll notice that yoga suits this style of movement really well. Even our vinyasa flows should never be so dynamic that we feel like we're popping ourselves into every single posture. It should feel more like a pull of an elastic, and then you're holding onto the elastic and you're pulling it back. instead of pulling the elastic and letting go and letting it just reform as itself. This is what's damaging. And this is sometimes what happens in yoga, especially when we're doing advanced stuff, that we just don't know how to do this, how to control the end of the movement. Goes beyond yoga too. You'll notice the first time you do anything, it's easy to kind of throw yourself into it, but the difficulties and most of the skill comes from how you allow for it to return. So this is the elasticity of fascia and how we work with it in an elastic way. In terms of stretching it out this way, you will do stretches that will bring you to your full and most maximum stretch, and then guide it back. Again, don't clumsily fall out of it, but guide it back so that you return to neutral. And then once you're at neutral, maybe go back into like a contraction. So again, we're going to speak about contraction and expansion within the human body and some exercises that help us do this. Let's move on to the next property. The next property we have is rigidity. Right, so the rigidity of fascia is, again, super important. Just like stress is important. But of course, there seems to be an excess of it. And an excess of anything, even elasticity or mobility, can cause damage, like we just learned. But an excess of rigidity just seems to be the case for most people because we are seemingly rigid in our physical movements. It just seems to be something that we're doing less of in our day-to-day practices. And so what we want to learn how to do is expand that rigidity through elasticity, but without causing any damage, without causing any of this dynamic damage that we were speaking about earlier. But what causes fascial rigidity and how can we solve it? Fascial rigidity is caused from tensile stress, and thank goodness for that. So now I want you to think of fascia as this experiment, and you might have done this as a kid. If you haven't, just try and imagine this type of substance. If you take cornstarch and you mix it with water, it starts to create this like milky, like fluidity substance in whatever vessel you have it in, a bowl or a lunchbox, whatever it may be. And this substance that looks almost like a porridge is really, really fun to play with, because if you go in really slowly with your hand, it's kind of like liquid, right? You can just immerse yourself into the liquid and you'll be good. But if you go in with pressure or dynamic speed, it becomes hard. So if you do this, it becomes like a rock almost. A little bit softer than a rock, but it becomes hard. It'll stop your hand from going in. But the more slowly you go, the easier it is for you. You can immerse your hand fully. But if you go in hard with pressure and with speed, then you won't be able to fit your hand in. Fascia works exactly like this. So when there is some sort of tensile stress, fascia knows to tense up. It knows, okay, I need to not be soft right now. And it creates a space or a contraction accordingly. So either it bundles up chemically to create some sort of contractive space so that nothing can move through it, or it allows for expansion so that things can move through it. And this is where the rigidity comes in, is it's either rigid or it's elastic. But what we want it to be is more fluid. The rigidity, however, comes into a way where, because we're so in certain positions every single time that we do something, we repeat movement patterns again and again and again. Just imagine if you had that same substance and you just constantly were putting pressure on it and you just left it again and again and again and again. Eventually it would just remain hard. Remember, muscle fibers and things like that are tiny, and those tiny little muscle fibers, if they're constantly being contracted, then the fascia in between is going to just remain hard until you release the muscle fibers. It's going to remain rigid. And this rigidity is what builds fascial bundles. Fascial bundles is something I speak about in the other video. I speak about it more from a psychological, mental, and nervous system perspective, but it is also something that is very true just from physical stress. Right? So you can have fascial bundles in your body because of repetitive movements or just from muscles that do not relax. And if you think about it in your day-to-day practice, it's something that you don't allow yourself to do. Because you continuously feel, by you I mean us, by we, we continuously feel that we need to be in some sort of doing motif. We need to be and be active. And this creates no space for the rigidity of our muscles, even the tiniest ones, and this is what we're trying to access, is the tiniest ones to be free. So how do we work with this now? Well, one, we want to release it, right? So a good way to release it is to learn how to relax. And this is where yoga comes in. And more specifically, especially now with the new yoga trends, yin yoga. Why yin yoga? Is because yin yoga is yin. It's just dominantly yin. For those of you that might not understand what that means, it's dominantly passive. Right? There's not a lot of activity. I mean, the activity that's there is very, very slight, and it's there to move you into yin. But most of the time, it's just yin. It's just absolute relaxation and restoration. And this is so that we can tap into those tiny, very small little fascial rigidities, fascial bundles, and release them. And why this would work more than regular yoga is because with regular yoga, you do activity, and this is still some sort of stimulation. And that stimulation itself means that you stimulate and then you come back from that stimulation. So you activate something and then everything you've activated, you deactivate. And this is great because sometimes on a very big scale, we need this. But for the tiny ones, because you've activated something, the deactivation of all those things will get you to a point that might not go into the tiny areas because you've built up and then you've come here, and here's the tiny areas. And then you'll build up again and you'll come here again. But you'll never go here because of the build-up and the momentum that you're creating. So with yin yoga, we start here. And then through multiple techniques, by just sitting with ourselves, it's a very meditative practice, we slowly come here. The movement is subtle, but to get to these tiny little areas, it's obviously a lot easier to start from here. In a sense, what's not easy is there's no momentum. And this is the difference you'll find with yin yoga and other yoga practices, is other yoga practices build up momentums. And they use momentums to create fluctuations within the body and flow within the body. There'll be momentum of activity and then mixed with passivity. But with yin yoga, it's just passivity. So the momentum is very slight. The momentum needs to come from your brain, from your thoughts, from your awareness and your consciousness, so that you can bring yourself just slightly here, so that you can allow for a release on that deeper level. And this is how we work with rigidity in the fascial tissue from a very deep level, from a very more artificial level. It's through certain fascial release systems, which I'm also going to speak about in a bit. These fascial release systems are ways that we can remove fascial bundling by doing some sort of physical exertion around them. Yin yoga does do this to a certain degree, but there's other things that you can do. And it's just basic yoga stuff, to be honest. Like, it's pretty much just stretching and releasing after activation. And then it's also just physiotherapy things by applying pressure and then finding out the acupressure points that can help us release these fascial bundles. But this is the rigidity. And then also in terms of using the rigidity of fascia is tapping into that elasticity, finding how we can make our bodies elastic. Once we've found our full length of elasticity in a certain posture, then engaging the rigidity and holding it there. Right? So if you think of a plank, for me is the best one to use. When you're in a plank and you're just in a plank and your shoulders, let's say, are like this, and you just have your arms out straight like that, you're not at your full length of elasticity, right? You're creating rigidity here, but you're not at your full length of elasticity. You have more range of motion to move into. So when you move into that range of motion by squeezing into your glutes, pressing into your arms, opening up, protracting through the shoulder blades, then you find your elasticity. This is as far as I can go. Now I become rigid. And you can see why. Just because of tensile stress, this is much better for your body and also just more strong in terms of what you want to be doing, which is stabilizing the body. This is how we work with rigidity and use it to create a more stable body in the movements that we make. The last thing in terms of properties that I'm going to speak about is fascia's fluidity. So like I said already, fascia is what carries and stores and flows the water and minerals between all the cells of our body. Well, I say cells, that's maybe a little bit too small, but definitely the fibers of our body. The cells in our body probably work in a similar way, but right now we're just talking about the more muscular structures of the body. So the fibers of the body wrapped around with fascia, and there's a liquidity that runs through it, right? This liquidity, this kind of almost juiciness that is in healthy fascia is what makes things easy to move and easy to be rigid, right? So just think of anything. If there's water around it or some sort of lubricant, it moves a lot easier. And in every movement, even in a movement such as holding something or being still or stable in a posture, there is still some sort of movement going on a very small level that is keeping things held that way, right? And it's the pressure of this fluidity that even helps with the elasticity. So again, just bring your mind to this element of water. Just think of water for a second and think of water maybe running through pipelines, right? And this is maybe a little bit too rigid to be honest, but it's the best I can think of for now. So water running through pipelines. If there's a blockage in that pipeline, it's going to be very difficult for the water to get to the other pipes. And then whatever that pipe is supplying water for is going to have no water. When there's no water, we're just going to say that whatever needs to be receiving the water is very dry. If there's a dryness, then there's a lack of movement, right? Think about when you're thirsty. Think about when you need water. You feel tired. You feel like you don't really want to move. You get a headache. And this headache is pretty much caused from strain in the brain. There's just no water to supply the muscles and everything that's going on. There's also less conductivity. Remember, water is what conducts electricity, and if you have less water in your body, then that conductivity is not so much there. And also, there's just less insulation. So not only conductivity, but if you're sending electric signals to something, then if there's more water around it, it insulates the impulse. As soon as the impulse goes in, the water helps to kind of redistribute it or make sure that the impulse isn't too sharp. But if there's not as much water there, then you're going to feel it a lot more. And your nerves are going to be a little bit more sensitive in a certain way, but sensitive with pain rather than sensitive with sensation. So water is a big part of every single one of our movements. We are, again, 75% or up of water. And getting this water to where it needs to be in the body and having it flowing in the body is really important, and this is where the fluidity of fascia comes in. So then also take into consideration that if you have a pipe and you create a blockage, it might be for a reason, right? Let's say you want to get more water into an area of the body, or you want to maintain a shape. So you contract your muscles. This contraction squeezes and stops the fluidity in the body at a specific place. This fluidity then builds up pressure, and this pressure takes up space. This taking up of space starts to create, again, this binding, contractive experience in the body that creates stabilization. And now you've stopped the water right here, and just like a bulging hose pipe, if you're holding it at both ends, it begins to expand. This expansion of the muscle is what creates strength and dynamosity. The only thing is we forget to unblock the pipes. This is the basic idea now, is we forget to unblock the pipes, and we have so many unblocked pipes eventually that we just don't know where to start. And this is why sometimes there are some tricks that you can use to just flush your system. Something like a detox, or something even like having a cold or ice bath, or going for a sauna. Things like this that very much use the environment or external stimulation to create flushes within the body. Even something like coffee, to be honest, does the same thing because it builds up the pressure in the body, right? This is the job or the function of coffee through its acidity. Again, think of fire, right? If I put fire in a box or a container, it's going to create pressure. This is exactly how hot air balloons work. And so when I put something acidic in the body, this is the good reason why we love coffee and stimulants like this, is because it creates this pressure in the body that starts to unclog a lot of the pipes. And this is why sometimes you might find that not only do you think better, because coffee's what it's done is it's released this pressure and allowed for more opening in the brain, which will allow for more creativity. But it also gives space to the body, and you might find that you drink coffee before you do a movement session because it does the same thing. But bringing this all back to yoga, in yoga we want to learn how to do it naturally. Not to say that any of these things are unnatural, but let's just say from a more self-sufficient perspective, right? From this amazing organism without putting anything in or out. When the only thing that we're using is our own consciousness and the body itself to create pressures and releases within itself. And to do this, again, there's a bunch of things we can do to create more fluidity in the fascia. And then you'll notice that when all three of these come into alignment, when we have elasticity, rigidity, all due to fluidity of the body, this creates a very functioning organism. This is when you can perform at your peak mentally and physically, is when you have this absolute fluidity in the body. And it's, again, just to touch on something that we're not going to speak on today, or in any other lectures, but it's something that I'm very, very interested in and do a lot of research and talking about, this is what flow is having a flow in the body. This is what this balanced state of being is when you've allowed your body on a mental and a physical way to become more fluid. And this is why it takes many things. Because also if the brain is crowded, think of if there's too much pressure in the head, there's no fluidity. Things are still being blocked in a very energetic way. And I want you to, the thing I love about fascia is it can take a lot of the things that were seemingly before maybe a little bit hard to imagine from our yoga practices or even spiritual practices in general, where we speak about very subtle energies. For me, the best one to speak about is chi. For those of you that don't know what chi is, it's similar to prana. For those of you that don't know what prana or chi is, it's pretty much just vital forces in the body. For me, this vital force is that kinetic movement in the body, that chain of momentum that is running through the body that sometimes it gets stuck, and when it gets stuck, it creates tension. Where there's tension, there's pressure. Where there's pressure, there's bulging. Where there's bulging that is not looked after, there is pain. Because if something's bulging, it's touching on a nerve. And it's also your body just saying, it's some bodily worker going to your body pipes and being like, yo guys, we have a problem here. This is what your nerves are. They're little tiny monitors of your body's inner systems. And they say, well, there's something going on here. And they do this by saying pain. There's pain here. And you then pay attention to it and you relieve it. And then that release of pain is also then what gives you that good feeling and that feeling of more relaxation. And again, less pressure in the head and less pressure in the body. So basically, this is the dimensions that we can take with fascia. And that's why I say I like it so much. It's because you can take something seemingly spiritual or very subtle or very hard to grasp, something that before in the past was very not tangible, right? But we have now given a platform, a modality to make it tangible. I mean, for me personally, it doesn't need to be tangible. I believe in these things regardless of if I can see it or prove it or not, because I just feel intuitively that there's something there. But at the same time, I understand why people would like to see it as a more tangible thing, and this is the gateway to it. Because fascia works on such a tiny, subtle level, and because these principles can be applied to it the same way that we apply these principles to these subtle energies when we're doing a yoga practice or a qigong practice. So these are the properties of fascia. These is how we work with it. We're going to go into a little bit more of definition, speaking about the fascial binding points. This is going to help us understand how the elasticity in the body works. Then we're going to speak about some fascial release systems, about what we can do to release those fascial bundles that we create. And we'll do some fascia movement protocols with my amazing friend who's going to jump in and do a little bit of a practice with us. So to begin with, fascial binding points. So the binding points of fascia, again, think of the body as this elastic organism. Obviously, the elastics are tied at different tensile stresses around the body at different points generally. It's not like the elastic is loose. Like there's not a point, even in your Shavasana, where your elastic is completely loose because your body would unravel itself. There are specific points in the body where there are knots, but good knots, like knots that hopefully will never go away because again, otherwise we will just collapse, that seemingly keep the body in. And then these are also very hypothetical, somewhat researched. We have kind of cut into the body and see that, yeah, there seems to be more fascial bundling here, but it's the right type of bundling. But it also may differ depending to person, and some of them are less obvious than others. But let's go through it. So the first place that we have for our fascial binding points is the ankle and the Achilles tendon. This is a really big one. So again, just for those of you that might not know what that is, it's this guy over here. This is the Achilles tendon, and it connects right into the heel of the foot. This spot is a really major, important spot for fascia. Again, if you just look at the human body from an anatomic perspective, you'll notice that this connective tissue starts in this Achilles tendon and runs up into the calf. This tiny little point right at the bottom is a very strong knot of fascia. And this is why a lot of the time, if you release here, or you bring your awareness here and make this the intent of your movement, you will have a greater release throughout the entire body because you're starting at its starting point. But again, this isn't the only starting point, and you'll see now how these areas are going to be very much interrelated and probably make sense a little bit of some of the stiffness you might have in your body. From there, we go up into the IT band. So again, you'll notice we're speaking mostly about connective tissues and mostly about tendons. Ligaments do seem to have, yeah, of course, some sort of fascial binding spots and potentials. But like we've mentioned before, ligaments are a little bit more flexible than tendons for a good reason. So they have more elasticity. The tendons seem to be a little bit more bundled up. So there's a little bit more contractiveness in them. They seem to be able to hold things better, obviously. So this is where the fascia seems to be at its most bundled and where most of the elasticity draws from. The tendons are also much more elastic than a ligament is. The pop back isn't so much from the ligament. Well, we hope not. Sometimes it is, but that's what we're trying to get rid of. It's more from the muscle, and obviously the muscle is connected via the tendon, and it's what creates this dynamic movement. So the IT band, it runs along here on the outside of the thigh, and then starts to come up through the pelvis, and then we get this pelvic crossover, right? So then there seems to be this fascial binding that goes this way. Even if you just look at how the muscles and how the ligaments work in the abdominal region, they start to cross over. They create this crossing effect, which is beautiful. It allows for so much elasticity. This spiral, again, bringing a little bit of sacred geometry into things, that spiraling movement, the DNA helix, that is ideal for movements. These twisting motions is what causes the most impactful and dynamic style of movement, what creates energy the easiest. You'll notice this in movement patterns, something as simple as a punch maybe. If you just punch straight, you're not getting as much force as if you punch with a twist. And it's that twisting motion that is bound by the fascia that creates an elastic movement for a twist because it's crossed over. And this crossover at the pelvic goes into the shoulder girdle. So it starts to cross over and then it starts to rest nice up here. Then at the shoulder girdle, again, you'll notice this is where tension often occurs. There does seem to be a little bit of fascial bundling, but it's also because we use the shoulders too much. There shouldn't be so much. Again, if you look at the tendons, it's there, but it's not as tight as we make it out to be. There seems to be an overuse of the shoulders, and this overuse is what causes unnecessary fascial bundling in the shoulder. Our elasticity in the shoulder is there for sure, but it shouldn't particularly come from the shoulder. And I'll tell you where it should rather come from in a second. The shoulders do help, and wherever our shoulders are pointing, our torso moves. But in terms of elasticity, we want this distribution to not end at the shoulder. If it ends at the shoulder, then this is what causes damage and pain. Instead, we move up and we go into the neck and the crown of the head. Now, neck movement and fascial fluidity and mobility is super, super important and super, super interesting. You'll notice that the two areas where the fascial binding seems to happen, the neck and the crown of the head and the ankle, are probably one of the least mobile areas in our modern day life. When was the last time you did a nice little neck wave, or that you use your neck like this, or if you speak like a snake? We don't really do it. Our neck's pretty much here or here, like I spoke about when I was speaking about the spine. And then same with the feet, when I was speaking about ankle mobility. It's pretty much doing something like this, especially if we wear shoes. We're so limited in how our feet move. And this is why there seems to be an overly stressed fascial bundling at the areas of fascial binding. But we can start to release that by moving these areas and learning how to move with these areas. And so now when I speak about movements and finding movement patterns, when you're using your body as a whole organism and you're trying to create a very functional, very fluid movement pattern, use these fascial points as references. So use the ankle, right? If you need release from the ankle, you lift up your heel. This creates much less tension because, like I said, there is always going to be tension there. So we want to release it and go into an area where there's less tension by just lifting up the heel. When you're using your neck, if you're making a movement, let your neck sometimes guide if the movement is slight and if you're supported. But if not, then let your chest guide. And let these ideas of elasticity be how you move your body. So I'm trying to get the full range of motion. I might need to use my neck, and then I'll also need to drop into my shoulders, and I'll also need to drop into my ankle. So if I were to just do a simple movement right now and find my full range of elasticity in something like this, then I'll need to point my foot, and I'll need to really stretch and create some engagement here, create traction in the shoulders. And now I've bypassed my neck a little bit because I'm using my arm. But if I were to use my neck and relax the arm, and this would give me my full range of elasticity. And you'll notice that moving back from this is a lot easier. So if I'm here at my full range, and I just slowly come back, you can almost feel the elastic nature of it. When you've made that full stretch, you can feel it going and returning back to neutral. And this is what we want to learn to play with in the body. This is what we're going to speak about next now. In releasing these areas predominantly with different techniques and from a principle perspective. So fascial release systems, these are different ways that we can release tension in our body. Some of them very obvious, but it's nice to just bring the obvious up and understand a little bit why the obvious are working so well. So number one is pressure. Right? Think of a massage. So any sort of pressure being put in the body is going to cause a release. So this might seem a little bit counterintuitive sometimes because if we're speaking about tension is the buildup of pressure. But again, think of pipes, right? If you have a pipe and there's a blockage, sometimes to get that blockage out, you just need to apply more pressure so it pops. And the body's the same. The body, again, like I said, is more malleable than pipes. Thank goodness for that. It's more actually like a hose pipe. So if you put pressure in with your hand, you're literally breaking up the little granules or the little tiny fascial bundles that might be causing pressure in the body. And this is why massage is so good for us, is because that's what we're doing the entire time. You're massaging yourself. And then going into the more focalized points of pressure. So you go to these areas, right? Or you go to the meridians. So the meridian lines are like a much more subtle version of this. The fascial binding points are more from a mechanical structural perspective. Meridian lines, which originates from traditional Chinese medicine, are more the internal systems. So internal energies, or the nervous system, you can think of it like that, and releasing that. But in terms of the physical points, you can release a lot of physical muscular tension by going to these areas, by going to the Achilles tendon, by releasing the IT bind, by releasing the pelvis, right? So any areas around here where your pelvic starts, your girdle is, even at the back. So this is what I mean. This whole area here, and even the glute, any sort of release here is going to release throughout the rest of your body. And going to the shoulder girdle, again, where do we get our massages mostly, and where do we feel the best, the most, is in these areas that I'm speaking about right now. We go to the shoulder blades and releasing here. This is going to help release most tension in your body, and then the neck, and then also the crown of the head. So the neck is also a very obvious one, for sure, but a lot of the time we forget that this area too, this scalp, is also very tight because it's the top. It's the tip top of where everything is being bound from. So imagine if there was a stick and you put an elastic band on that stick. Where is going to be the most points of pressure? Well, most of the time, the pressure is going to be at the lowest points and the highest points. This is the highest point. So there is a lot of tension going on here that we are unaware of. And this is why head massages are also amazing for you, and a good way to release your fascia is by getting your scalp massaged, or just giving yourself a scalp massage. This is pressure. Now in yin yoga, we use pressure in a different way. So in yin yoga, we start to put ourselves in a position that builds pressure to allow for a release. Again, think of pipes, right? So if I connect pipes in a certain way to aim the pressure at a specific blockage, so if there's the blockage here, but I can't seem to get to it because nothing's really connected to it, then I will move and create contractions somewhere so that the pressure starts to build up and we pop the blockage. This is what we do in yin yoga, is you put yourself in a position. Again, you've also not created fluidity in the body because you haven't done anything dynamic. So you just put yourself in the position and you rest. Why yin yoga also takes a long time is because you have to really wait for everything. You have to wait for the pressure to build. And then you also have to wait for the release. It doesn't just happen like that. As much as I'm making those sounds, it's not really a pop. It takes a long time. It takes a holding, and then slowly the pressure starts to build. Again, otherwise it might just be too damaging. So we just hold, and then slowly the pressure builds, and then there is a release. And this is how we use pressure as a release basis for fascia. The next thing that you can use is stress. So stress on the body causes this opposite swing. So this is where we use the momentous, method that yoga sometimes uses, and that sometimes exercises can help us with, is where we put stress on the body, and then in the come down of the stress, we just guide that come down into areas of the body where we need to release the most. So you exercise your whole body, and then when you're finished and you're loose, you allow for yourself, as you're sinking into this parasympathetic state, to aim that energy, or that release of energy, into specific areas of the body where you need it the most. And this is how we use stress. Also stress from an environmental perspective, if you think of ice baths or saunas, is when you put your body under stress, whether it be hot and you're creating this intense heat, not only from a very, very physical perspective of creating, drawing the water out of your body and creating this fluidity, what it also does in an internal way is it puts stress on your mind and your nerves, and when they return back to much more parasympathetic states. And the same with ice bathing, and introduction to cold. And then, that's why I've mentioned warmth and coolness here. And then also thinking about warmth and coolness in your practice. So if you're doing a warm practice, or you can think of it as a yang practice or an active practice, this can help release fascia and help bring fluidity to fascia. A cool practice can also help release fascia, but it does it in a much more subtle way. does a more inner relaxed way. And again, playing with the difference, going through alternative styles or practices, being more passive, being more active, playing with the ratios of the two, and then also seeing what happens when you do one and then do the other separately. This is what's going to help you understand your body a bit more than anything, but it's also going to teach you what you need to do for your body and when. When do you need a fascial release that is a bit more on the yin perspective? When do you need to gain fluidity that is gained more from the yang perspective? And this for me is where fascia can come in and help us learn more about our body and what we're doing pretty much in our yoga asana. Beautiful. All right, the next thing we're going to speak about are some fascia movement protocols. So I'm going to call my amazing friend Monica to come up. And she's going to do a little bit of movements just to kind of help you understand, again, how fascia works and some things that you can do in your daily practice that are very simple. They're pretty much warm-ups more than anything else, but also to understand fascia a little bit more. So if you could just come stand in your mountain pose facing towards the camera. Awesome. So we're going to start by speaking about the kinetic chains. So kinetic chains are using the fascial binding points that I spoke about in a more fluid way, right? So you're using the ankles, the IT band, the pelvic crossover, the shoulder girdle, the neck, and the head to create a kinetic chain of movement that then starts to release fascia in these areas too, and also just bring awareness to them as well. So to create a kinetic chain, you just start one body part at a time. So we'll start just with your neck. So you can just start to move your neck in any way you like. Good. And you can do this in multiple different ways, right? So you can gain awareness of one part, and then you can relax, come into neutral again. Then go to the next, go to the shoulders. So just moving the shoulders however you like. Again, very nice and slow movements. Again, these are warm-up movements. And then coming back to neutral, going to the hips, just moving the hips however you like. Good. So you'll notice that Monica's using her shoulders as well. So what you want to try and learn how to do is isolate the hip movements away from the shoulder, where you're just doing this. So just very subtle movements of the hips, where we're not using the shoulders to move the hips and just isolating that kinetic chain. Good, then you go down into the IT band. How we access the IT band more is through the knees, so then doing knee movements as well. And the best way to do that without touching the ankles is lifting up the knee and just allowing for movements. Or if you want to, you can keep the heels down and move the knees like this. Good. And then go into the ankles and then just play with the ankle movement. So this is isolated kinetic chain movement. Now ideally what we want to do is learn how to move the entire body with all of these kinetic chains at once. So we're going to see how Monica does. And we're going to start with the neck. So start moving your neck. Good. And then while also moving your neck, start moving your shoulders. This also builds really good body awareness. And then while also moving your shoulders, start moving your hips. And while also moving your hips, start moving your knees. Yeah, it's kind of like a nice little fluid dance. And also your ankles, so coming onto your toes. Good. So that is what we want to try and aim to learn how to do, is to first isolate and then also create this entire movement of the whole body, where everything from the shoulders to the hips and the neck is moving, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes not. Then you can also obviously bring your hands in as well and start using your wrists to move as well, and just finding elasticity. And this is where the play perspective comes in, is when you're creating these kinetic chains, is you start to learn what different things feel like. You start to learn that if I bring my arm out here and maybe drop in my knees, I can create an elastic effect in my upper torso. And then that helps me bring myself forward again. and finding these different ways of moving the body and finding different bodily awarenesses is going to, one, just keep your body very healthy. It's going to increase your mind awareness, and it's going to start to release fascia in a very deep way. You'll feel how fluid you feel afterwards from these movements, because there's also not tension. You'll notice that these movements aren't like contracting a muscle. It's very much moving with the natural flow of the body and creating elasticity in the body, and using the elasticity of fascia to move your body rather than contracting the muscles. All right, next thing we're going to do is cross-body stimulation. So cross-body stimulation is when you're just moving your body in a way where there's twists, essentially. So if you want to, you can just bring your left arm over. Yep, but reach up nice and high. Good. And then step your left foot out. Yeah. And then create a nice little twisting motion. So imagine that the tip of your fingertip and the tip of your toe are attached by an elastic band, and you're trying to pull that elastic band. This is creating a cross-body movement, right? Because you're literally crossing over your body, and then you can do the same with the other way. And then see how, again, you can get elasticity from this. See how maybe if you twist your hips a little bit more in or more out, what happens? So if you twist your hips in, you'll notice you get less elasticity, right? Because I can just go all the way to the other side. But if I let my hips drop in, I get this cross-body movement because my hips are pressing in the opposite direction. Beautiful. So that's one way to do it. Any twist that you do is pretty much a cross-body movement. Another way to do it is reverse that by bringing the leg behind you. So bring your right foot behind you, place it down, and then bring your arm up. And then from here you can come into a nice side body stretch, grabbing onto the wrist and just pulling down. And again, seeing what happens when you play with the hips, when you straighten the legs, and when you press down with that foot. Beautiful. The next thing we're going to speak about are a heel to toe movement. So heel toe, like I said, the Achilles tendon is something that is very much controlling a lot of the fascial bundling in the body. And when we can start to release here, we can start to release everywhere. And because it's very difficult to do this with the crown of your head, because your head's very sensitive and also up in space, it's easier to do it with your body, with your bottom body, and release down first. So you're just going to stand in a mountain pose. You're going to flex your toes up, and you're just going to rock back and forward. Yeah. And every time you rock forward, you can allow for this little hip movement backwards, just to keep you in balance. This simple motion, done repetitively over time, maybe just for a minute or 2 minutes, is going to definitely start to release the fascia and create a very subtle, but then eventually deep stretch of your entire lower system. And it's also going to help with the upper. Now, to help increase this, you can start providing a little bit more of a hip thrust and allowing yourself to contract a little bit more down. So when you come down, you come up, and then when you go back, you go as far back as you can. So trying to create like a little curve of the body. This creates a lot more fascial release now because we're tapping into the back. We're using the arms. And yeah, if you fall forward, it's fine too. You also, something to get used to because you're balancing. And you will find that you know where your state of balance is. You can also do this from a forward fold. So if you were to forward fold. Good. And then place your fingertips out in front of you to help you. Exactly. And just rock back and forth here. This is a good way to really isolate the lower body movements and find that fluidity. Good. The final thing we're going to do is full stretch contraction and full stretch expansion. So we're going to start by the full stretch and then go into the full stretch expansion and go into the full stretch contraction afterwards. What this means is finding the biggest range of motion you can in your elasticity and then slowly bringing it into a contractive state, going into your full contraction and then bringing it up. There's definitely different levels of this as well. We'll go through 2 levels. We'll go through the standing level and then the full contraction level. So for the expansion, you're just going to become a star. So your feet can kind of stay where they are, though, to be honest. This is kind of the more moderate version. You're going to lift up, go as wide as you can. And then as you exhale, you're just going to contract in. Bend the knees, bring the elbows in, and become a little bit more flaccid. And then same thing coming out. Use your breath here as well. Inhale and exhale. Again, control it back. And one more time. Inhale and exhale. Control it back. Good. And release. Now we're going to go into full contraction and expansion. If you have any blood pressure things, just be a little bit careful here, because we're going to be going from a very big, wide, highly pressured position to a very, very small position and then back again. So if you have high blood pressure, do this very, very slowly, especially when you're coming up. The going down, not so much, but definitely the coming up. So we're going to start, again, this one, you can also allow for your feet to move a little bit. Come into a big star shape. So a big star shape, as wide as you can. Even flex your toes. Go big, as big, like imagine like you're trying to reach everything. Even allow for like more, like someone's pulling you. And your chest and everything's being stretched. There we go, yes. So the biggest opening you can imagine. Inhale, and as you exhale, start to contract. You can even move your feet in and bend your knees. Go all the way down. It's like a seated child's pose. Drop your hips. And as relaxed as possible here. Good. And then now this is where you need to be careful and where you need to be very mindful in your movement, is the coming back. So inhale, on your inhale, slowly come back, but very slowly relax the neck, keep the chin down. Good. Vertebra by vertebra. Find your neutral, and then once you found the neutral, expand again. Inhale, and one more contraction, as deep as you can. Beautiful, and relax. And those are the movements that we're going to be doing. So this one is exactly what I was speaking about with the elastic band. So we're bringing ourselves as wide as possible, and then we're gently guiding ourselves all the way into our most contractive states, all the way to the ground even. You could even come into a full child's pose if you like, and then you're bringing yourself back out of that. As again, this is where the mindfulness comes in and where you start to learn how to use your muscles to guide yourself. As you start to bring yourself back. And there's a very intuitive way, usually, if you allow it, that brings you back up, and then your neck comes up, and you find your neutral position, and then you stretch it out again. Fascia loves this. Your body's going to love this. It's going to build a lot of this kinesthetic awareness that I've been speaking about. And it's also going to be a great way for you to bring more mindfulness into your practices, into your classes. More body awareness, and just to learn how to use the body as the organism that it is. Again, we've been gifted with this level of consciousness where we can be aware of ourselves in a way that is seemingly different to other animals and organisms. And with this awareness, we can start to learn a bit more through experience and through combining intuition with analysis. And so use these analytics that I've just given you for fascia, these properties, and experiment with your body and see how everything that I've explained now to you feels in your body. And if it does feel awkward at first, this is okay. It's because your brain isn't used to it. It's like learning a new movement pattern, right? The first time you did anything before, there's awkwardness. But what I want you to take note of is where your awkwardness is, especially in the body. So if it's in your hips, or if it's in your shoulders, or if it's in your neck, and you find it hard to isolate that part of the body, or you find that that part of the body is most rigid, this should be a part of your body that you want to bring more awareness to, that you will need to release a little bit more. It might need more mobility, or might need more stability. Depends. Whatever it is, you just need to bring awareness to it, and then the rest will follow. And that's why this is such a great exercise. And that's pretty much it. So play with the movements that you do. Play knowing that fascia works in a very intelligent way and it knows what to do. And there is a very deep level of surrender that we need here. So even in these areas of the body that might be rigid, it could just be because there's a surrender that you need. There is definitely a crossover into psychology, 100%, and I speak about it a little bit in fascial bundling, where those areas of release are probably due to some sort of emotional, trauma or emotional tension, or it could be just a stress thing or an anxiety. 100% they're going to form in the fascial bundling of your body. And so it is going to be a limiting factor in your movement sometimes, and it's also going to be why you feel tension in certain areas of your body more than others. That is because of the emotions and the psychology that you're going through. So keep that in mind as well if you are experiencing emotional releases, or if you just don't understand why you're not gaining mobility in there. It might be a deeper inner reflection that you need to look on, because everything is intertwined and everything is connected. And apart from that, enjoy, have fun, experience your movements in a more playful way. Use this elasticity of movements that maybe you've seen contemporary dancers move with, or even gymnasts, but use it in a way that's a bit more healthy, in the sense that even if we're being elastic, we want to be controlled in the comeback. Sometimes we can allow for big explosive movements, but know that that's going to be causing destruction and deterioration in your body, and it will cause pain eventually. So this one, the more big explosive movements in moderation, this one for longevity, right? The more controlled your movements are, these types of movements are going to keep your body in a state of longevity, more so than the more destructive movements. Again, percentage, sure, ratio-wise, 100%. You can go like 25 yang, 75 yin, but try keep the yin more. Even if you have to start with like 51% yin and 49% yang, yin should be more dominant, and it'll just bring you a better life in terms of your physical well-being and your mental well-being. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, Man, for everything. And have a beautiful day. Much love. Peace out.